Hey guys, what's going on? Ethan Jago here, and welcome to another installment of the Battlefield Theologian podcast. It's been a while, I know. It's been, I don't know how many weeks, months it's been since I've done the last podcast. I apologize, but there's been a lot of stuff going on. But the Battlefield Theologian podcast, why do we exist? What's the point of the Battlefield Theologian podcast? Well, the aim of this podcast is to train Christians with theology-based tactics to combat a bigger enemy that seeks to steal, kill, and destroy a Christian's personal walk with Christ. My goal is to put biblical tools into the hands of every believer's tool belt so that they can enter the spiritual battlefield that is this life. I'm excited about this podcast. I've got a 3-part series we're going to be doing. This is part 1, raising boys to become men. And then I've got 2 other ones, men's role in the home, and then also how or should men protect their families. What does that look like? We're going to be looking at a lot of different ideas. What should men do? Should they be able to protect their family? If so, what does that look like? Before we jump into this podcast, I want to give you guys some updating events that's happening this September 20th and the 21st here at Five Bridges Church in Panama City Beach. My friend Costi Hinn is coming, and we're having a conference called Knowing the Spirit. This is going to be an incredible conference, giving you a biblical understanding of who is the Holy Spirit, what does the Holy Spirit do, what does the Bible say about the Holy Spirit. There is a lot of misgivings and misnomers about who the Holy Spirit is, how does the Holy Spirit work, and this is going to be an incredible conference. It's a Friday and a Saturday here at Panama City Beach, so if you're listening to this and you're not from the area and you're looking for a vacation, plan your vacation here. To register for this, you can go to forthegospel.org/Knowing the Spirit Conference. I'm going to put this in the show notes as well. Additionally, this year, later on in October, I'll be speaking at 2 different men's conferences. The first one's going to be at Grace Fellowship Church, a men's event called Strive. This is in Independence, Kentucky. It's going to be on October the 5th. I'm going to be talking and teaching us through 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. So registration for that will open soon. I'm recording this on July the 10th. So look for that if you're in that area. And then finally, I'm doing a men's conference with my friend Grant Castleberry in Pensacola. Again, this is going to be a men's conference. The theme is going to be Pray, Prepare, Participate. It's going to be October the 24th and the 25th in Pensacola, Florida. You don't want to miss that. But today, what are we going to be looking at? Well, we're going to be talking about raising boys to become men. This is going to be the first of a 3-part series that I'm going to be doing here, and it's going to be focusing on men, sons, and items that men and women both alike, both parents, need to focus on and consider from a biblical perspective. Now, to jump into this pretty quickly here, I've got some verses that we need to understand regarding children, regarding disciplining the children, raising godly children in this kind of a world, in this culture that we are living in. Psalm chapter 127, verse 3 says this: "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward," meaning that children are a blessing. Children should not be looked at as a nuisance, but children are a blessing from the Lord. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." What this is talking about is the necessity to discipline your children, the need and the necessity to train them up, to tell them what is right, what is wrong, how to live their life, how to conduct their life from a biblical perspective. And a good focus of what we're going to be talking about today is going to fall within this verse. And then Proverbs 29:17 says, "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give you delight to your heart." Meaning, when you discipline your kids, when you're not overly harsh, but when you're disciplining them in a godly, biblical, controlled manner, they will obey, they will respond in obedience, and it will delight you. You will find joy. And sometimes it's not always easy, nor do we find joy in disciplining our kids. And it seems like we're in seasons of super difficult times where it doesn't seem like they're listening or that they want to listen. But this is what it's talking about here. Then we have Proverbs chapter 19, verse 18. "Discipline your son, for there is hope." I'm going to take these off. It says Proverbs 19:18, "Discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death." Meaning, you discipline your son so that way you do not lead him in astray. By not disciplining him, he won't go astray where he will end up being a criminal, getting put to death, or anything else like that. So discipline has multiple ramifications and effects, both in the positive and the negative. good discipline, good child. Bad discipline, bad child. But sometimes you kind of find a mixed bag of this as well. And then Proverbs 15:5, a fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. So this verse in Proverbs 15 says that fathers must be giving instruction to their children. And that's one of the ways we can raise boys to become men is the dad. Men, you need to be raising your kids. You need to be instructing your kids. You need to be teaching your kids. And what aspects? All aspects of life. All aspects of life, physical, spiritual, mentally, emotionally, every aspect, you need to be giving your son instruction. And it says too, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. So we need to be prudent in how we are raising our boys, how we're raising our children. And this applies whether you've got sons or daughters. This is a universal application. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be specifically tailored towards young boys, but I think a lot of the principles can be applied to young girls as well. And then I'm going to end with 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14 to 17. Paul says this to young Timothy, but as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it, and how from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, and the man of God may be competent, equipped for every good work. I love that verse here because as Paul talks about in the beginning of this section here, continue, he's saying to Timothy, continue in what you have learned, and not just learned, believed. So the instruction that Timothy received was a learning which would lead to belief. So that was the focus of the instruction, is the way in which Timothy was taught, the way in which he was discipled, the way in which he was grown and developed, leading to faith, leading to belief, was, as Paul continues here, from childhood. So the best time to start loving, instructing, disciplining your kids and helping raise godly boys and girls is now. If you have young kids, it's now. And I don't care how old your kid is, unless they've moved out and they're married, if they're still living in your home, you still have opportunity. You can still right the ship. You can still pour into them in a positive way. But what Timothy is saying, or what Timothy is being instructed here by Paul, is that there is training that Timothy has gone through. And the universal principle for us is that we as parents, we need to be training and instructing and loving our kids. And it needs to be precise. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be loving. And we need to be doing this from childhood until they become an adult. And as he ends in that section here, the reason for this training is because you're training them in how to be righteous. Why? That the man of God may be competent, meaning they understand it, they're adequate for it, and they're equipped for every good work. So that's going to lay the premise of what I want to be talking about today in raising boys to be men. It's seemingly frustrating, I believe, when you look across the landscape of the culture and just the rise of feminism, the gender confusion, boys looking like girls, girls wanting to be like boys. And the question then comes, what do I do with my kid? I'm a Christian, I'm a parent. How do I raise my child in this pervasive culture? What can I do? How can I go about doing it? Because we need you. The church needs you. I need you to pour into your kid. It's your command. You've been given and blessed with this child. It's the fruit of the womb. And it's a blessing from God. God has blessed you with this kid. It's your responsibility to help train this kid, to raise up this child, to help equip them in righteousness, to train them in righteousness. And so the question then comes that a lot of people talk about, well, what do we do? How does this look? Because there's so much confusion out there right now regarding raising kids, discipline, education. And a lot of times I think the culture pervades the kids or makes it appear as though the kids are a nuisance. The children are an annoyance. You need to have the kid, but when you have them, here's how you deal with it. Get a nanny, do this, do that. And that should never be our view of children. Our children should never be in a nuisance. Now, can our children at times be annoying? Absolutely. But they're not a nuisance. They're a blessing. And a lot of times, though, we think that the children are limiting our hobbies, our extracurricular activities, and some even our careers. It's a hindrance. And so it's frowned upon. And so it's almost like you've got these kids, these precious little souls at home, and you're just like, I don't want to deal with them. Well, that's why God created man and woman. That was the mandate for us to be fruitful and multiply. So we've been given the command to have children. And when you have children, they're a blessing. They should never be looked at as a nuisance. But a lot of times in the media, in the movies, in the TV shows, man, they really make it seem like the kid is this annoying little brat that's stuck to your side. And man, I can't go anywhere. And I mean, I even see reels, and I get it. Like, yeah, you want some space, you want some time, but embrace these years, embrace this time. Now, the interesting thing is too, is the children have been viewed as a nuisance, but then also too, there has been out of this, if you will, technologically advanced era that began early in the 2000s with the internet, cell phones, social media, where technology now has almost become easier to help parent your kid, and you can become a very disconnected parent. You give your kid an iPad, they're set for days. You give your kid video games, they're set for days. As long as my kid isn't bothering me, I give them that device, that's good. And then wait till they grow up, they become 18, 23 years old, and then the parents are like, well, why doesn't my kid want to spend time with me anymore? You've never spent time with your child. You've never trained that child. You've never modeled to your child what a biblical parent looks like. What is their expectations? And so you use this technology to babysit them. And the sad thing is there's an ongoing war with technology. I love technology. We're using technology right now to be able to get this podcast out. But there's good uses, there's bad uses, and there's this fine line that we need to be able to discern and delineate for ourselves, but then also definitely for our children too, because with this technological advancement that we've had, that there's an ongoing war for our children. The participants in this war are the children. Now there's one going on for the adults too, but I mainly want to focus on today on the children. The battleground for this children is everywhere. It's in the schools, it's in social media, it's in sports, and it's in modern medicine. Now, again, the purpose of this specific podcast is focusing on young boys. If I've got a young child that's a boy, what do I do to train them to become a godly man? As we looked at that verse in 1 Timothy. Well, if you look at young boys, and we compare and contrast young boys with young girls, and one realm that I love to study, in addition to theology, is psychology. If you look at the difference between young boys and young girls, there's a difference in how they process information, how they learn, how they're wired. And that's a unique gift that God has uniquely and innately baked into our DNA. Men at the outset of creation were to be the protectors. They were to be the heads of the household. They are the hunter-gatherers. They are the ones to go out to protect, to tame the land. And then the women was created to be the helper of the man. They're to be, as Titus 2, to help be the keepers of the home, to help nurture and raise the children, to help love on the spouses, on their spouse. And so when we look at the two different genders of boys and girls, let's take those two different genders on how God created them, and now let's insert that into the school system. Let's insert that into the education system. Now, if we look at the education system and we look at the difference between the boys and the girls, there's a disparity that will often arise as you observe these kids. For instance, let's just say the teacher hands out a coloring sheet, and the teacher gives out this coloring sheet, and the girls are going to be using multiple colors, coloring within the lines. What are the boys typically going to do? Maybe use one or two colors. They're definitely not going to be coloring in the lines. They're going to be adding things in. I know I always used to add little guns and stuff to like the people's faces in the books, or putting mustaches on them. They're looking at how do I take this piece of paper and turn it into a paper airplane, or how do I fold this into some kind of a structure? But when we think about that, that's an action of learning. There's a purpose behind that learning. But the other thing is back up even more. The kids in the education school system, the way in which America's education system is, it's really myopic in what does the outcome look like, or what is the proving grounds for this education. The expectation in the educational system is that the child is going to sit for hours on end, and they're going to be listening to the teacher. They're going to fill out worksheets, and then they're going to have hours of homework when they get home. So there's a small box of what education looks like in America, and your child must fit into this box. And if your child is not fitting inside this box, if your child can't sit, if your young son can't sit in that desk for 3 hours straight listening to the teacher jaw on about consonants and alphabet soups and all this other stuff. Like, your kid's got a problem. There's an issue with your son, or there's an issue with your daughter. Is that what right looks like? Can every kid, and should the expectation for every child sitting in kindergarten or pre-K to sit there and just listen the whole time? And then they fill out worksheets. And then I know sometimes my kids would come home and they would have papers and papers of homework. I'm just sitting there like, y'all were just at school for 6, 7, 8 hours. And now you're coming home and you have even more homework. What is the retention looking like in that? What's the ability for the child, specifically a young boy who's hardwired for adventure, who's looking for things because that's just baked in their DNA? Are they going to fit into that mold? Well, no, not always the case. And now, sadly, too, a lot of schools have eliminated recess completely. And so now you don't even get that recreation time. I remember as a kid, man, I was loving, I could not wait for recess. Man, that's when we'd get kickball going, dodgeball, basketball. We'd run a mile, whatever else we would be doing during that recess time. And now a lot of schools, they don't do recess. So when are the kids ever actually physically getting active and involved? And so they're sitting down and they're being crammed into this seat. And now they have to sit and listen. They have to write. They have to color. They have to listen, write, color, listen, write, color. And heaven forbid if your son isn't paying attention. If they're not doing it exactly how the teacher wants, if they're not just making eye contact with that teacher, yes, ma'am, if they're drawing as the teacher is speaking, or maybe it looks like they're zoning out, but maybe they're not. I think this is a very difficult paradigm for us to make our kids fit into. And what happens is that when these assumptions are like, this is the expectation for the child, I understand that. There should be an expectation of, hey, you're going to school, you're going to learn, you will be quiet, you're not going to talk when the teacher's talking to you. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the expectation of how long does a child sit? What is it that they are being taught? And is there truly an issue with this child if they're not sitting still as a statue for however long? Now, when we think about this, we've got to talk about an issue that plagues young boys. It plagues young girls too, but specifically it is more predominant in young boys. The boys, like I said, in the classroom, they're not going to sit down for that exercise. They may not color within the lines. They may not complete the assignment as quickly or as efficiently as the teacher would want. And the teachers then bring the parents in and they say, I think your son has a focus issue. We think this into your son may have ADD or ADHD. Now, granted, there are probably legitimate issues mentally with other items, but a lot of what is being diagnosed as ADD and ADHD, I do not believe is actually true. The CDC has said that 15% boys are 15% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls. Well, why is that? Again, like I've already said, boys are uniquely wired differently. They're not good with understanding the how to do it. Boys want to know the why to do it. Now, over 44% of the diagnoses of ADHD for boys, the number one issue with it, the number one item that diagnoses these young boys with ADHD, it's behavior and conduct. So your child has a behavioral issue. How so? Well, they're not focusing. Why so? Are you a good teacher? Are you holding their attention? Are you even trying to teach? But then now the teacher brings you in, guilt you as a parent. Your child has ADD. Your child's never going to get ahead in life. And so sadly, a lot of parents feel frustrated and they want the best for their child. It's like, okay, I guess they do have ADHD. But I believe there's an underlying issue within this that's more physiological than it is mental. It's more baked into the DNA and how God has so uniquely wired young boys who eventually, Lord willing, will grow up to be young men. And with this educational system, the government has been fully now integrated into the educational system, where they're the ones even purporting, I mean, with Big Pharma and everything else, they're asserting now that the government knows how to educate the kids better. The government now has its own agenda. Biden's put forth a lot of different bills and everything else that influences universal health care, or not universal health care, but universal preschool for a lot of the kids. Well, guess what comes with government-funded preschool, government-funded education? So now the federal government is going to be the primary educators. So now no longer is education now a separate institution. Now federal government is molding young men and women, young boys and girls, and giving them and changing the curriculum and changing the focus of what was into what they want to be. What does that output look like? I get a 3-year-old and I take them through the educational system up through college. What does that college student look like? Well, I think we're seeing the results of that right now with how liberal our world's gotten and how liberal the universities are. And this era that we live in, it makes it very difficult for Christian parents to raise their children in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, according to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. The federal government has dominated and is dominating the educational system and the curriculum. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you don't have to be a genius brain to go into Google and just type in and look at the different stories of these young kids getting gender reassignment surgery, or even here in the state of Florida with the Amendment 4 that they're trying to pass this election season, is that your gym coach, if your daughter is being sexually active, your gym coach can give authorization for your child, if this goes through, your little girl, to go get an abortion. I mean, the education system has been rocking. And then how dare we bring Christianity into the school when they say you cannot bring religion into the school? There's already religion being taught. It's religion of self. It's religion of humanism. And so the question is how do we raise our boys amongst the government's educational injection, amongst the government's, swaying of the curriculum? Now, that's not all over the place, but in a lot of places, in a lot of the big metropolitan cities, it is. And I'm not trying to be one of those conspiracy theorists. Now we got to wear an aluminum foil hat and everything else. But what I am saying is you as a parent, you need to be active in your child's education. You need to know what they're being taught. You need to understand what is actually happening. And if the teacher brings you in and says your young son has ADHD, you need to ask some diagnostic questions. Why do you think that he has ADHD? What is his level of learning compared to everyone else's level of learning? Everyone learns at different stages. Everyone learns at different paces, and everyone has a different method and mode of learning. You have just a few: auditory, you have the visual, and you have the hands-on. So if all that my child is being focused in is on the auditory, but they're a hands-on learner, that's not an issue on them. That's an issue on the presentation of the education. And again, like I said, our education system, your kid has to fit within that box. But then what happens if they don't? Well, they get diagnosed with ADHD. They get pumped with a bunch of pills, which then suppresses them. They change their demeanor. In some cases, I have seen it help some people. But ultimately, though, it works for a while. The kids can get addicted to this Ritalin, and this is an ongoing issue. I mean, even with adults right now today, adults are getting diagnosed with ADHD. It's almost a joke now where people are just saying, yeah, I got ADHD. Is it really ADHD, or are you just not focusing, and have you not developed the necessary skills cognitively to help you focus? I think that's a big issue, and I think that's the number one issue that I think is helping the government pump our kids full of drugs. And I think that's one issue that parents, you need to take your kids back. So what can we do then? How can I train my young son? Or maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, my son's already been diagnosed with ADHD. He's already on this. What do I do? I'm not saying you take him off this completely, nor am I saying you're a bad parent. What I'm saying is there's other things and there's other steps that you can do. And there's things that we can do to help raise our boys to be godly men. So maybe you have a kid that is about to be born, or maybe you have a young son who's only a few months old or maybe a year old, and you want to know, how do I best set my child up? How can I raise my son to be a godly man? Or maybe you do have a child that's 3 or 4 years old. Is it too late now? They have that diagnosis? No, it is not too late. But I want to encourage you to go through some of these steps I'm about to take us through and process and think through some of this, because we need godly men. We need these boys to grow up to be godly men. We need these little girls to grow up to be godly, God-fearing women. And that starts with you as the parent. So we've already seen the importance of biblical training early on at the stages of life when Paul's addressing to Timothy. But what we need to understand now is, what role does technology have in the raising of our kids? And what should my, if you will, theology of technology be? Now, most children under the age of 9 can navigate a technological device with no issue. I mean, even my son, who's 13, there's sometimes I have a a computer issue, he comes up, he figures it out. I have no idea how they know how to do this stuff, but they're at the age of the internet. They have always lived when internet and access to information was at their fingertips. My son's learned to play piano from watching YouTube. So there's definitely some positives in technology, but there's also a lot of negatives as well. A lot of our kids that are being diagnosed with focus issues and they're being prescribed drugs to limit the control of their behavior, a lot of that is because they do not know how to focus. They're having a difficult time focus. But why is that? Well, why is it that boys typically have a higher diagnosis for ADHD, whereas girls do not? Well, the girls, like I said before, the girls, young girls, they're learning and how they're developed is they just need to know the how. Now, not all the case, but the young girls need to know the how. But the boys, they need to know the why. Why am I doing this? Why am I learning math? Why do I need a color inside the lines? And oftentimes, a lot of adults and parents and teachers do not feel that they even have to explain themselves. Why do I need to tell this little child why they need to do it? I've said it, you will do it. I don't think that's necessarily always the case. There is sometimes, if we're about to cross the street, my son is about to walk out into the traffic, and I say, stop. I don't even say, now, son, stop, because otherwise you might get hit by a car. No, there's times in which I do not need to explain myself, but there's other times in which you do need to help give them the why, especially if you've got a young boy. Explain to them the why. Why is it this way? And if you want to get through to your child, the best way to get through to them is you need to help talk to them and give them the why, especially for young boys. Why is it important for my son to color in between the lines? What is that teaching them? What is the practicality for math? And in what situation can I learn math? And how can I apply this math? How will this work in my future? Why is it important for boys to learn to control their behavior and exercise self-control? Well, that is, like I said, the number one diagnosis for ADHD. And how do I help give my kid the tools to help them learn to control this? You give them the why, but you need to first understand the why. Well, why do I want my kid to be self-controlled? Is there biblical precedence for that? Absolutely. Why do I need my child to obey me? Well, because the Bible says that this is the way things are. This is the respect for the authorities. Honor your father and mother so it may go well with you. For this is the first commandment with the promise. So we get that. But have you ever explained that to your child? What tools do I need to impart to my kids? What do I need to explain to my son? What do I need to explain to my daughter? Now, when we think about how to get through to our kids, and we hear that the school's diagnosing us with behavioral issues, they're diagnosing our kids with focus issues, we understand the educational system. Let's put that off to the side. But now let's just assess our children from a physiological or a character standpoint here too. And how is it that we as the parent relate to our children? How are we to help grow our children? How are we to instruct our children? How are we to discipline our children? Like I've already said, let's start specifically with young boys. Let's help explain the why. But the biggest thing too, I think, is we need to rethink the strategy that you and I take on a day-to-day basis and change our approach to how we communicate to our children the expectation. The biggest thing I see when I do premarital counseling or even marital counseling is there's two items mainly that I see as a large issue that results in marital problems. The first one is lack of clear communication. There's not a clear amount of communication between both partners. They think that they're communicating, but in reality, as you start to talk and I start to counsel through them, they really don't talk as much as they think that they do. And then the second thing is they have unmet and unexplained expectations. What I mean by that is the husband expects the wife to respond in a certain way. And when that wife doesn't respond in that way, it creates to some turmoil. It creates to some tension. Same thing with the kids. Apply that with the children. Communicating clearly with your child. You need to clean your room. Here's exactly what you need to do. Because they don't know. When you say clean your room, your mind already knows what that means. But if you've never articulated to your child in a very clear and concise manner, that's just a blanket thing. So they're left to come up with their own definition of what does a clean room look like. I guess it's just to put my pillows on the bed, and then you come back into the room and you're angry and you're upset. Why haven't you cleaned your room? They don't know how to. So you have one, failed to communicate clearly, and two, you've not actually given your expectations, and they're always going to fail to meet your expectations. How many of you have told your children, hey, when you go to school today, I want to hear that you've done well, you've paid attention, you didn't get in fights, and you ate all your lunch? I know that might seem redundant, but your child doesn't know that, especially when they're young. It's on you to raise them. And you may think, well, I had to figure it out on my own, so my kid needs to figure it out on his own. Really, when you were going through your life, did you really appreciate that? Did you appreciate as you got older, you had to learn on your own how to do taxes? Did you have to learn on your own how to handle conflict? I mean, no, it wouldn't have been so much better if you had, I don't know, an entity to help train you in that. That's the parents. So parents, help communicate with your kids. Be very clear in your communication. Articulate what you mean when you say what you mean. Also help too with managing your unmet expectations. I think this is the case too in the spiritual world. When we are talking about salvation and we're talking about repentance with our children, I need to be very careful and cautious that I'm not using Christian jargon that an adult who's been in the church for 15, 20 years would understand and expect that my son or daughter would understand that. So if I'm using the word like the gospel and I tell my kids, yeah, you guys just need to believe the gospel. Do I know if my kids could define the gospel? Have you ever sat down at dinner and be like, hey, do you guys know what the gospel message is? Like, what is the gospel? Can you articulate it to me? And get that feedback from them. So in the same thing in the physical with cleaning the room and everything else, expectations at school, same absolutely in the spiritual. Do your kids know how to pray? If you say, all right, go ahead and pray. Well, I don't know how to. Well, you'll have to figure it out. Just talk to Jesus. Well, help them, model them, parent them. That's what you are supposed to do. And when you see these issues arise and where problems are happening with your kids' interpersonal relationships or your kids' ability to focus or maybe some anger or control issues, have you ever just sat down and talked with them? And I know sometimes it's tough because your kids are seemingly all over the place, or they talk to you for 15 minutes about a Lego toy that they have. Great, you're spending time with them. Find out how you can engage with your child and communicate and clearly articulate in a controlled, loving manner. Because there's a difference if I say, hey, son, I want you to go and clean your room, pick up your toys, vacuum the floors, brush your teeth, pick up your hangers, dust your floors, vacuum your floors. That's going to stress them out. If I say, hey, buddy, here's a list I made for you. You're going to make your bed. Do you know how to make your bed? Ask them that question. Yeah, I do. Great. I need you to pick up the toys, put them in the bin. I need you to put your clothes on the hanger. I need you to put your dirty clothes in the laundry and be very clear in your expectations, and then give them a timeline. Say, hey, I'm going to give you 20, 30 minutes to get this done. I'm going to put on some music for you and come get me when you're done. So instead of making it like this punishment, it's not a punishment to teach your children how to clean the room. It's a developmental issue. You're developing them on how to clean their room. And then if they're wondering why, be like, hey, buddy, I'm teaching you how to make up your bed so that you learn how to be a disciplined individual. You learn cleanliness. And I'm preparing you for the future too. When you find a wife, if God blesses you with a wife, you're not going to annoy her by always keeping your side of the bed messy, or you're not going to annoy her by just throwing your dirty clothes on the clean laundry. So that's why we're training them. That's why we're teaching them. So we need to make sure that we're using clear communication and we're making sure that we're managing our expectations. Because when we're thinking of this, I think a lot of this is going to help us mitigate other issues. Because a lot of things have been rising within these kids, not just focus issues, not just behavioral issues or anything else like that, but there has been a rising increase in mental health issues with boys and girls born right around the 2010 era. Now, Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Anxious Generation, he says this, quote, a shift changed between 2010 and 2015, which is the period I call the Great Rewiring. The increase for girls was much larger than the increase for boys in absolute terms, the number of additional cases since 2010, and a hockey stick shape jumps out more clearly. However, boys started at a lower level than girls, so in relative terms, the percent changed since 2010, which I'll always use as the baseline. The increases were similar for both sexes, roughly 150%. In other words, depression became roughly 2.5 times more prevalent. End quote. So what Jonathan Haidt is saying here is the depression, the mental health issues, the anxiety, we are having unprecedented amount of cases like that in this young generation, starting roughly around 2010. And the reason why is because of the advancement of technology. It's the social media aspect. It's the virtual friendships. So all of this is interconnected, which is going to make sense here in a second. So if you're wondering, what does all this have to do with education, with ADHD, with focus, with behavioral issues? All of this is interconnected. And all of us are dealing with this as parents because I guarantee most of us have devices at home. And I'm not saying toss all of them out, but what I'm saying is that a large portion of all of this is that the technology, the tablets, the video games, the iPads, that is the primary teacher. That's the primary babysitter. And sadly, that's the primary amount of socialization kids have today. Now, breaking this down, social media tends to be what the girls more go towards, and video games is what the guys go towards more. Now, you may think, well, is there anything inherently wrong with that? Yes and no. If we're limiting the amount of time, we're limiting the amount of interactions that they're having, because if you think about it, the access and reach to a countless amount of people that they can network with and talk with is dangerous. I want to know who my kid's talking to. I want to know if they have their headset on and they are playing video games, if they're messaging someone back and forth on TikTok or Snapchat or something like that. I want to know who they're messaging. I don't know what's being said to them because everyone and everything is vying for influence in your kids, but it's your job to protect them, to watch them. Not because you're trying to be a dictator, but because you're trying to be loving and you're trying to help protect them from the attacks of the devil and the different modes and methods and means that he comes to get you as. Now, the knee-jerk reaction to this idea is eliminate TVs, eliminate technology, eliminate video games. But I don't think that's the right answer. And here's why. We live in a technologically advanced era and it's continuing to evolve. So if my kid does not have a good discipline and theology of how to use technology appropriately and in a controlled manner, what's going to happen when they get older? You know, I know that growing up, I was not allowed to have a lot of sugary snacks. My cereals that my mom bought, it was super healthy cereals. Now as an adult, I've got all the Captain Crunch, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Reese's Puffs. Like that's my jam now. So my mom and dad try to protect me from unhealthy cereals and I appreciate that. But now I have them. I love those. So same thing with your kid. Whatever you restrict from them and you don't teach them how to use it properly, they're going to take that to the fullest extent. So if you don't teach them how to control their time on social media, if you don't teach them the appropriate amount of time in playing video games and how to respond to people, they will never develop that discipline and they will waste a ton of their time on this. So I do not think that the reaction of just getting rid of all technology is the answer because our kids, one, live in a technologically advanced era. It is only going to be evolving more. Their school's going to be using computers. Their job's probably going to be using computers. So these are valuable skills. We just got to teach our kids how to use them appropriately. So what we have to understand too is that with this great rewiring that Jonathan Haidt was talking about and the socialization and development of social media, video chats, video game talking platforms and everything else, there is a huge role that has shifted here within the developmental areas of the children. Our children are not being supervised nearly as much as they should be in certain aspects. In areas that they don't need to be supervised in, they're overly supervised in. Here's what I mean. When you're at home, and I know sometimes my kids, we allow them to go on their video games. The kids go to the rooms and they jump on their video games. I'm not in that room with them supervising what they're doing. I'm not saying I necessarily have to. But then when we go outside and we go play outside, we're right there. We're staring at them like a hawk. So where's the danger? Where's the more danger? Is there more danger to having a computer in the room with your child with free internet access? What can they get into? Does that require supervision? Or when I'm at the park, do I need to be 5 feet away from my child at all points in time, supervising them in that aspect? See, I think we've got it backwards. We're supervising when we shouldn't be doing as much supervision, and we are not supervising where we should be supervising. So if your kid's in the room, you need to have restrictions. No computers in the room, no internet in your room. You do that in the family room. And then when you go outside, your kid needs to have unsupervised time of play. And what I see a lot of with a lot of young parents, and by no means am I a perfect parent, is you've got that helicopter parent, right? You've got to be 2 feet away from your kid. But when you are 2 feet away from your kid and your goal is to protect them from everything, negative comments from friends or from other kids at the playground, not falling and twisting their ankle, or not hitting their chin on the chin-up bar, or not even allowing them to attempt the chin-up bar, by you preventing that, you are delaying a physical development issue in your kids. You're not allowing them to work through the risk-taking behavior. You're not teaching them or allowing them to learn through their own play what are their limitations. And there is a level of protectiveness. I'm not saying let your kid go ride their bike in the middle of the street. But what I'm saying is you need to be very careful and cautious on how controlling over your kid in every aspect of your kid when it comes to play. When you look at the 1980s all the way to the 2010s, that was a play-based childhood. For those of us who were born in between that era of 1980 to even 96, I mean, most of us were outside and we had neighborhood friends. We would be playing games outside. We'd be building forts with sticks. You'd be finding and using your imagination, but you were always outside and you were always in a physical social setting for the most part. Now, I'm not saying that that was the best type of childhood, but we had a play-based childhood growing up. But around 2010 era, now we have a non-play-based childhood. We have more of a social-based childhood where the social interactions are through social media, is through technology, whereas before it was through physical play. And here's what the problem with that is when I'm online and I have a bunch of friends online, the second someone says something bad to me, guess what? I can block them, never have to resolve this conflict, and I have 15,000 other friends or 500 other friends or 50 other friends that I'll go being friends with. Now take that same concept and apply it to neighborhood friends. You've got a bunch of kids in the neighborhood and they're playing. All of a sudden something arises. There's a conflict between two individuals. What do? Can you block that individual physically and then just never go and play with that individual? Sure, but remember, there's that herd group mentality. So if person A is there and you're there too with all the other friends, you got to work that situation out. And so a lot of times the leading of depression, the focus issues is a lot of times we do not allow our kids the opportunity to work through those interpersonal relationship issues. Social media, it lets you block, mute, unfollow, whatever, and that's it. You never have to deal with that again. Whereas in play-based, in neighborhoods and stuff like that, now you're having to work through difficult times. Now you're having to resolve conflicts one way or the other. And so we've got to think about this. One, am I supervising my kid when I don't need to be supervising him? Or am I not supervising my kid when I should be supervising him? And I think there's a huge problem too that we all face is there's a fear that our child is going to get bored. Oh no, my child's bored. I don't know how many times we've been somewhere and one of my kids says, Dad, I'm bored. I said, good. You need to learn how to be bored. You need to learn how to see the raindrops on the window go down and figure out which one's going to race, because with boredom comes creativity. With boredom comes imagination. Now, I'm not saying purposely go out there and bore your kids to death. What I'm saying, though, is we do not always need to be giving into the instant gratification of our children, and that's what they desire. They want instant gratification. I want this. I want it now. I want to have fun. I want to have it now. But we as adults fall into that too, so we need to be careful. It's okay for your kids to be bored. It's also good, and it's okay for your kids to go and explore. You see that kid, your kid climbing up the side of the fence? Hey, they need to learn if they fall. Obviously, now if there's like danger, super danger there, but if they fall and they get hurt, that's a part of childhood. They now know their limitations. If they never know their limitations, that will exacerbate later on in more death-defying risk-taking activities. But if you're going to the playground and your kid wants to try the monkey bars, okay, now if they're like 4 years old and if they fall, they'll probably break their leg. Yeah, I might have my hands nearby as they start to go through. But as I realize, yeah, they've got this, I'm going to back off. I'm like, yeah, no, you got it. Go ahead and take care of it. And if you fall, just make sure you don't reach your hand out, try and roll into this. Let your kids take some risks. They'll learn from that. They'll grow from that. And that's a part of being a child, is allow your kid to have some unsupervised play, but then also make sure you are supervising your kid in the more dangerous areas that could be more detrimental based off of our world that we live in. Now, moving on from this, talking about how do we raise our sons to be godly men? Well, I think what we've been looking at is the world is trying to diagnose our kids. The education is vying for our kids. The inception of social media is vying for our kids. All of these things basically do not allow your son to progress where he should be progressing. A lot of times that's why we see the boys not maturing as quickly as the girls, because The boys aren't being trained, nor are they getting the opportunity to really hone in their God-given unique abilities that God has so wired them to do. What do I mean by that? Think about if you have a son or maybe a friend's son. What's the biggest issue that you see in that boy? Maybe it's focusing. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's discipline. Maybe it's responsibility. It's probably all of those things, right? That's some of the items that we need to train our sons in. But how do we do that? Well, letting them be babysat by devices is not the answer. Letting them just, have a bunch of online friends is not the answer. You need to develop your son and you need to train your son in the direction where you want him to be, how you want him to be as an adult. Eventually, he will hopefully, Lord willing, become a father, a husband, a business owner, a leader in the church. So where are you taking him? How are you developing him? So what I want to suggest to you is because our whole world is pushing towards social isolation, even though it makes it feel like it's not social isolation because you have all those virtual connections. Virtual connections do not translate into physical connections. Watching church online is much different than being in church physically. I'm not seeing my fellow brothers and sisters and being able to rub shoulders with them or pat them on the back or give them a high five or give them a hug. You do not experience that in the virtual world, nor does your son experience that in the virtual world. I don't care if they have online friends. I remember it was a joke back in the day when, you had online friends. You're like, do you even have any friends? Well, yeah, I got friends online. But now, that's the norm. It went from being something mocked at to now it's like, oh, yeah, you do have friends online. You've got a lot of friends online. You need to get your child, you need to get your son in group settings, in group activities. And you need to get them in an activity that helps develop their problem solving skills, how to adapt in situations, and how do they overcome obstacles? Because that's what young boys need. They want to learn to solve problems. They want to know the why. They want to learn how to adapt, to overcome, to accomplish something, to have a goal to work towards, and a purpose and a meaning. That's how men are wired. That's why when you look at all the hobbies that are catered towards men, that's what they're looking for. That fish that needs to be caught, that golf ball that can get hit further. Whatever that activity is, that's how God has wired men, is there is a goal or a hill or a mountain to climb, and they want to get to that point. So get your son, get your kid in some kind of a group setting that has that. And I want to give you one suggestion, Jiu-Jitsu. And yes, I believe that Jiu-Jitsu will definitely help your young son, especially if he's got diagnosed with ADHD, if your son has discipline issues, if he has focusing issues, if he has self-control and anger issues, it's the best thing for him. Now, some people might think, well, won't that make it worse if he's got anger issues? Won't he now be able to hurt and inflict more harm on others? Not necessarily the case, and here's why. Let me break this down for you. Let me talk about the first item that we need to train our young boys in to become men. The first item is, again, outside of loving God and having a relationship with him, I'm talking more in the physical sense, physical characteristical traits. The first thing we need to train our young boys in is responsibility, how to be responsible, how to take actions and responsible actions for themselves. And how do I see that Jiu-Jitsu does this? Well, if you start with the uniform, then let's start with the uniform, which is called the gi. And let's talk about a kid who's 4 years old, a 4-year-old son you're enrolling him in Jiu-Jitsu. He will be assigned a gi. It's the big kimono top with the pants and a belt. And here's how this helps create discipline and responsibility for them. Your child now knows that this is their uniform. They're responsible to take care of that uniform. They're responsible to pack it. They need to know where it is. They need to know how to wear it. They need to ensure that it gets washed. They need to make sure they bring it with them to class. Because if we look at that gi as a representative item, and let's remove the gi from the context of jiu-jitsu and insert any other everyday item into this scenario that your child needs to learn how to be responsible with, books, shoes, clothes, homework, they're learning that discipline through the use of a jiu-jitsu gi, and then it will apply into the books. So if your kid has been in jiu-jitsu for a while, naturally you will start to see them become more responsible with their backpack, with their books, with their shoes, with cleaning, whatever else it is, because they're learning responsibility. Because they're learning that gi for jiu-jitsu is a necessary item to care for. Because if they show up to the class without their gi, they're not going to be able to participate. If you take your child to jiu-jitsu and they forget their belt or they forget their top, That only will take one time, because then as they're sitting on the mats, side of the mats, not being able to participate with everybody else, they'll realize I'm not going to do this again. And the best way for a lot of us to learn, specifically our kids too, is you learn more from failing than you do from always having everything work out well. Because they'll go back in their mind, remember, I don't want that to happen again. I'm not going to forget that. So the gi will help over time instill a level of responsibility in your son that will continue and translate into the real world. Now, the second aspect that we need to do to train young boys into becoming godly men is we need to help them focus and help make sure that their mind is developing appropriately. Now, I'm not saying we're going in there like the Mad Hatter trying to tweak their brain. What I'm saying is using certain situations and contexts can help formulate and give them the recipe for them to make those dots on their own. So let's again go back to the jiu-jitsu. Let's take the kid now from the gi. They've arrived at the gym. Now they're looking at classes. The classes are very structured at most jiu-jitsu gyms, and it's structured to help give the child consistency in what they can expect when they get to class. A typical format would be they get there, they change into their gi, they enter into the mat space, they have some warm-ups, there's some teaching, then they're putting into practice with their partner, and then they're applying it in a setting. Now, the flow of this class helps teach the child that they're coming to this class for a purpose. It's structured for a reason. This isn't just open free time where they go to class, they run around and they have fun. They will have fun, but they're going to class. They're hearing a teacher, which is typically called a coach, and the coach is teaching these kids. And the kids know, I need to listen to this guy or this girl. I'm going to listen to them because it's showing them I'm coming here for a purpose. It's giving them the why. Now, it may take a few weeks, but eventually the child will recognize when they're rolling with the other kids, when they're applying it in the application setting, as they're using this techniques with other kids who might have been there a few more weeks, that other kid is applying the technique accurately on me, and they're holding me down and I can't escape. And it will be frustrating at first for your kid, but this is where the self-control comes in. It creates this healthy competition, and every boy wants healthy competition. That's just hardwired into our DNA. They're thinking, I don't want to get held down like that again. I can't believe that person held me down. What am I doing wrong? I probably need to pay attention more. They're making these slow connections, and over time, given enough time, you will see a change in your child. They will see a change in their ability to practice jiu-jitsu. And the good thing is with jiu-jitsu classes, it helps teach your child to focus. And it teaches them to focus using the three primary learning methods. But in the classes setting, it's teaching them to learn as they're being taught auditory. They're hearing the coach talk, and they're also seeing visually the technique on the other individual. And then they get into hands-on, where the coach will say, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to grab his shirt here. You're going to wrap around the arm here. And this is why you do it. You want to hold him down here for control. You wrap your arm around here for control. All right, now go with your partner and practice this on each other. So now they're having to look, listen, feel, think, and apply. And then they're having to recall memory. Okay, I did this, step one. Step two, okay, I think this is right, but it doesn't feel right. And then the coach comes in, or their training partner helps them out. And that is really helping them out, because most boys are auditory or visual learners. And if they're not one of those two, then they're for sure a hands-on learner. And that's what you're getting in jiu-jitsu. They're getting all three of those. They've heard it, they've seen it, now they're going to go and do it. Now, as you give your child a few weeks in these jiu-jitsu classes, you're going to see their focus increase. You'll notice that they're going to start following your instructions, because boys need to be told what to do and why they're learning what they're learning, and jiu-jitsu gives them that. And this is helping develop your child's brain for kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, to apply those same techniques. What I'm learning here at the jiu-jitsu gym, I can also apply with my math teacher. I can also apply with my science teacher. I can also apply with my mom and dad. I'm listening to my mom and dad. I'm obeying my mom and dad. I'm applying what my mom and dad have told me. Now, when you multiply that over several years, you will see your child develop a very healthy form of learning, self-discipline, and then finally, it's going to get into the third item, self-control and behavior issues. Like I said, 44% of the ADHD diagnoses came from behavioral and self-control issues. And I believe jiu-jitsu will help remedy, if not completely fix this issue, if you have a son that deals with this. Because the hands-on aspect in jiu-jitsu it's hands-on. I mean, you cannot do jiu-jitsu by yourself. You have to have a partner that you're doing jiu-jitsu with. It takes kids from what they're hearing and practiced in a theory, and now they're putting it into practice. It's hands-on grappling. It is frustrating and it is definitely intimidating at times, but it's also very rewarding. There's going to be times when your child is, if you do get your child in jiu-jitsu, you're going to be sitting and you're going to see your child getting put in very uncomfortable positions. When normally in these uncomfortable positions, what is the typical response when a kid doesn't like something? They get very angry. They get very frustrated. So let's just say your child gets put into that position by another child and they're not being hurt. It's just a matter of the technique. They're applying it rightly. It's being supervised. Normally when that happens, when a child is having something done to them or they're in a position or they're doing something that they don't want to do, they get angry and it would then rise to physical violence, to striking or something else. But because the other child is doing the technique properly, it doesn't matter how angry they are. They're not going to be able to move or improve their position from that point because they're allowing anger to dominate their whole mindset. So what will happen, and I've seen this personally with my son and other young boys, is you see them get in a position and they get visibly angry, but they can't do anything. Their arms are pinned down as the other person's on top. And you see them like this blank stare come across their face. Well, now what do I do? Anger usually solves this issue. Well, it's helping your child be confronted with the dilemma. I can continue in anger, but I've already realized this is not going to improve my situation. Or I can calm down, control my thinking, control my breathing, and think through this situation and search my brain to determine what technique I need to do to get out of this bad spot. And that's the reality of combat sports like jiu-jitsu, football, and other ones. But in order to practice jiu-jitsu, you know that you are going to get put into these positions. You know that you will consistently get in uncomfortable locations and uncomfortable positions where it's hard to breathe or your arms bent weird. But you're learning though, and your child is learning how to calm themselves. I've seen young boys come into jiu-jitsu with major attitude or major self-confidence issues or anger issues. I've seen over the course of a few months, a completely different shift. They're focused. They're not nearly as angry. They can control their emotions better because jiu-jitsu has given them that avenue to do so. Now, in addition to these uncomfortable positions and self-control, you're also teaching your child how to manage and deal with stress because they will be put in a controlled, stressful situation. This helps them process their emotions, how to control their emotions, and how to respond in the proper manner because they're doing this with another one of their peers. And most likely friendships were going to come out of this. So now they're getting that socialization aspect. They're getting that communication aspect. They're learning how to appropriately discuss with the other individual, not to get frustrated with the other individual, and also to respect the other individual. But they're also learning and developing relationships. And again, they're experiencing now also, finally, riskful behavior. This is great. They're finding satisfaction in accomplishing a difficult task. They're learning how to do it safely and under control. And also they have a goal that they're ultimately working towards, the belt advancement. They're looking to get to that black belt. They're looking to gain knowledge. They're looking to gain experience, learning to protect themselves, learning to defend others, learning how to work through difficult situations and mitigate them appropriately. And all of these are necessary items for a young boy to learn to grow up into becoming a man, a father, and a husband. They now, because of jiu-jitsu, have learned all of those other physical traits, but now they can protect themselves. They can protect their family. They can control their emotions. They can control their anger. They can help model and teach to their children proper ethical behavior. And this doesn't just apply in the jiu-jitsu gym of what they're learning, but it will apply at home. You'll see it in your child with your relationship with them, with their future relationships, when they get into a job, at work, responding properly to a boss, but then also too in church. It teaches the children commitment because jiu-jitsu, it takes a while. It's unlike other martial arts where you can earn your black belt in under a year or so. In jiu-jitsu, most people quit by the time they earn their blue belt, which is the first colored belt for adults. Children have to be at the age of 16 to get to their blue belt. And most adults that get to their blue belt end up quitting. Why? Because they've seen how much time and commitment it takes to even get to this point. It can take anywhere between 7 to 12 years to get to a black belt level, but it takes time. It takes patience. And a lot of times people quit because they don't have time, they don't have patience, and they have unrealistic expectations. So for children, it's even longer because if your child enters into jiu-jitsu at the age of 4, they can't earn their adult blue belt till the age of 16. And then it'll take another 7 to 12 years after that. So they've got a journey ahead of them, but they are going to learn a lot through that journey. because it'll help teach them not to quit. It'll help teach them commitment, to dedicate themselves to something, to have that goal to accomplish. They're constantly working towards that goal. And for young boys, that's a great thing to learn that many are not learning. Many boys, and men for that instance, have no commitment. They quit. The second something gets hard, they quit. But as a parent, encourage your kid lovingly, hey, let's continue through this. And the reason why I love jiu-jitsu, and I love soccer and I love other sports too, is that if your kid starts in jiu-jitsu and they last, as long as they don't quit, they'll continue to progress. By the time they hit the rank of the black belt, they now can have a job. They now can have and earn some, maybe even start their own school, have a living here. The likelihood of your child going into professional sports is slim to none. The likelihood of your child getting to a black belt and then maybe opening their own school, working part-time at another one, is much higher. And on top of that, they're learning a lot of discipline and commitment and everything else. And it also helps teach your kid to slow down this instant gratification that so many kids have. They want that instant gratification. I want to get this now. I want to get this now. They'll be in jiu-jitsu for a year or two until they get their next belt or until they get the next stripe. And these skills that they're going to learn translates into so many different aspects of their life. And I believe that is truly how we can help raise our young boys into becoming men. So finally, wrapping this up here, by having and teaching these kids, your sons, responsibility, discipline, self-control, controlling their anger, learning commitment, all of those things translate into the spiritual, which is the most important. They need to have the ability to pursue after Christ, to take up their cross daily, to love the Lord, to spend time in God's word, have good lasting relationships. It helps teach your boys, your sons that eventually will become men, that when things get tough at church, when people get angry at you, you can slow down, you can control your emotions, and you can't control what other people do, but what you can control is how you respond. As James 1:19 through 20 says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." And I think that's one thing that all young boys need to be trained in, to control their anger. If I am angry, am I lashing out in anger? My son is angry and he's lashing out in anger. As James says here, they're not going to continue in righteousness. They're not going to be able to continue in holiness. This is a critical item for our boys to understand, for them to grow into young men. But the thing is that's just one side of the coin. The doesn't end just with this. We must now also focus on the spiritual. What I was talking about is the physical, but now let's briefly look at the spiritual. Parents, you're the primary disciple makers of your children. Just like I'm not going to outsource discipline of my kid to anyone else, that's on me. You're also the primary disciple maker. Do not outsource discipleship to the church, to the school, to devices. The church should not be your primary disciple maker. The church is the training center for believers. And the individual members come to the local church, and you as a parent get trained, and then you go and you disciple your kids. The church is absolutely a supplement to helping train and guide your kids, but you are the primary. The responsibility falls on you. The church provides the opportunity and the growth and the knowledge for you and your kid, but you're the primary growing person. So it's your responsibility to discipline your kids, and it's your responsibility to disciple your kids and to help show them what they're putting into practice at church, what you're learning, to teach them, to then send them out. So we cannot outsource our children's discipleship to anyone else. It's your responsibility. The church is a great help. The church is a training center, but it's your responsibility. As Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child according to his way. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." If you do these items, if you focus in on your son and you are clear in your communications, you're making sure your expectations are very known, he understands them, you're giving him opportunities for riskful, controlled behavior, group interactions, you're developing him both physically, spiritually, and mentally. You're not allowing the education system to determine what's good for your kids. You're not letting any outside sources determine what's good for your kids. You're taking the responsibility on yourself. You're training up your kid in the way he should go. You're disciplining your son. And again, I think a good aspect to help give your child those tools is through jiu-jitsu, but then also 100% getting involved and staying involved in a local church. I hope this first episode is helpful. I hope this gives you some items to think about. Next episode we're going to be looking at is going to be coming out in a couple weeks. I'm excited for that episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Battlefield Theologian podcast. I'll see you guys next time.